Hi, friends. Some stories remind us how much courage it takes just to survive. On a misty morning at Blue Ridge Wildlife Preserve, a newborn bobcat named Milo was left behind before he ever had a chance. Most would have looked away. But Dr. Lauren Parker, breaking every rule in the book, chose hope over certainty, and it changed both their lives forever. If you've ever wondered what it means to give a second chance, even when the odds seem impossible, this story is for you. Share your thoughts below, and if Milo's journey touches your heart, like or subscribe so we can keep spreading hope together. Let's get started. Blue Ridge Wildlife Preserve in North Carolina was a world painted in mist that morning. Dawn clung to the treetops like a secret, fog blurring the old fences, dew glazing every blade of grass. Somewhere on the edge of the forest, inside a hollowed log, a litter of newborn bobcats squirmed for their place in the world. Fur barely dried, eyes sealed, they pushed and tumbled over one another with instinctual desperation, except for one. Milo was the smallest by far. He was alarmingly still, no bigger than a pine cone, his fur wet and patchy. Each breath was a shallow, shuddering battle. His mother, fierce and wild-eyed, sniffed him and let out a sound that was neither a purr nor a growl, a sound older than memory, older than words. Then she nudged Milo aside, turning her attention to his bigger, mewling siblings, her instincts choosing strength over hope. The others squirmed and fought for the best spots at her belly, their tiny bodies shoving Milo until he tumbled away from warmth. The cold was quick and sharp, crawling beneath his skin. Milo tried to move, but even that seemed like too much. He lay still, a quiet heartbeat among the noisy struggle of survival. Outside, the preserve was just waking up. Staff members in green jackets and worn boots crunched along the frosty paths, already deep in the routines of animal care. Inside the animal nursery, Dr. Lauren Parker hunched over paperwork with a steaming mug of coffee. Her day, like every day, had started before the sun. She didn't know that in a hollow log out on the edge of her world, the smallest test of her career had just drawn his first breath. It didn't take long for the morning check to find trouble. 2 interns, Cassidy and Jake, had drawn the short straw. Newbies always got the Bobcat watch. "Looks like a full litter," Jake whispered, peering through his binoculars from a distance. Except, wait, is that one even moving? Cassidy frowned, scribbling in her logbook. "You see how she's pushing him away? Should we call Lauren?" They hesitated. The rule at Blue Ridge was simple: intervene only if you must. Nature had her laws, and every hand meant 1,000 unseen consequences. Still, there was something about watching a life slip quietly away that even the strictest rules couldn't make easy. Minutes passed. Milo's breaths grew shallower, his siblings oblivious as they squabbled for space. Cassidy's nerves got the better of her. "I'm calling it in. If he dies out here and we just—" A voice crackled on the radio. "Nursery, this is Bobcat Watch. We have a runt, possibly non-viable. Guidance?" Lauren was already halfway out the door before the call ended. Medical bag slung over her shoulder, heart pounding with that old, familiar ache, a feeling she'd never grown numb to. Not in 15 years of wildlife work. She moved quickly, her boots silent in the wet grass. When she reached the hollow log, the scene unfolded just as described. 4 healthy kittens, one too small, too quiet, half buried in the moss. For a second, she just stood there, watching. Every vet knew the odds. Most runts in the wild don't make it. Interfering often caused more harm than good. She heard the old refrain echoing in her mind. "You can't save them all. Let nature decide. But as Lauren watched Milo, something twisted in her chest. He wasn't gone. Not yet. His sides still fluttered with effort. She thought back to her own childhood, the way teachers and even her own parents had sometimes overlooked her because she wasn't the loudest or the fastest or the one who always raised her hand. What if someone had just given up on her? A hawk screamed overhead, slicing the morning silence. Lauren glanced at the interns, saw their faces, hopeful, scared, wanting her to make the hard choice for them. The world, she thought, doesn't usually notice the small ones. Maybe it's time it did. She reached into the log, hands steady despite her racing heart, and gently scooped Milo into a towel. The little bobcat was cold, barely there, a whisper of life. "Let's give him a shot," she said, not quite sure who she was talking to. Herself, the staff, or the wild itself. Back at the nursery, debate crackled in the air like static. Some staff argued it wasn't right. Resources were tight, and protocol was clear. "We can't break the rules for every runt," said David, the senior keeper. "It's hard, but it's the job." Lauren didn't flinch. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to say, "Not this time." But at what cost? She hurried Milo into her office, transforming a shoebox into an emergency nursery. Heating pad, towels, the faint glow of a lamp. Every second ticked louder. Outside, dawn spread gold across the mountains. But inside, the tension was thick enough to choke. Would Milo even survive his first hour away from his family? Was Lauren risking too much? Not just for herself, but for this fragile life she dared to believe in. As the sun crept higher, Milo's tiny chest rose and fell in slow, defiant rhythm. The whole preserve seemed to hold its breath. Would this unwanted bobcat become just another sad statistic? Or was this the beginning of something nobody expected? Dr. Lauren Parker's hands trembled as she closed the door to her office behind her, the soft bundle in her arms impossibly light. Outside, the world was waking up. Trucks rattled down the gravel lane, birds called across the canopy, and sunlight spilled gold through her office window. But inside, everything narrowed to the shoebox on her desk and the kitten inside it. Rules, protocols, expectations, none of that mattered now. All she could see was Milo, so frail and small, fighting for each breath as if the world itself was weighing down on him. She set the shoebox on her cluttered desk, the heating pad already humming beneath a folded towel. Gently, she laid Milo in the center, tucking a scrap of flannel around his body. He barely moved, eyes still shut tight, his little chest fluttering like a leaf caught in the wind. For a moment, Lauren just watched, heart in her throat. The magnitude of her decision pressed in from all sides. Every year, the preserve handled dozens of wild births. Sometimes, nature decided who lived and who didn't. Intervening was discouraged, sometimes even forbidden. They'd all seen well-meaning efforts go sideways, imprinting that turned wild creatures into pets, or infections that spread through the nursery, or heartbreak when, after days of sleepless care, the little ones simply slipped away. But she couldn't walk away. She remembered her own beginnings, growing up on the edge of things, overlooked, quietly wanting a shot to prove she mattered. It wasn't the first time she'd broken the rules for something she believed in. This time, the stakes were higher. Footsteps sounded outside her door. Lauren barely looked up as Cassidy and Jake slipped in, eyes wide and anxious. "Did you get him warm?" Cassidy whispered, peering at Milo, her voice tight with hope and worry. Lauren nodded, her tone clipped and calm. He's critical, but he's got a chance. Cassidy, I need you to run down to the pharmacy and get fresh kitten formula. Jake, sterilize a syringe and bring me a new feeding bottle. Move fast. They sprang into action, grateful for something to do. Lauren sat back, forced herself to breathe. Her mind spun with the calculations of risk and hope. Dehydration, infection, hypothermia, failure to thrive. She'd seen all of them before. But there was something about Milo, a stubborn flicker that refused to go out. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. David, the senior keeper, stepped in, arms folded across his chest, his expression stony. Lauren, this is against every protocol. We can't save every runt, you know that. Lauren looked up, voice steady. This isn't about every runt. This is about Milo. I'm responsible for his care now. David's frown deepened. You're risking resources, setting an example. If the interns see you break the rules, they'll question everything we do. Lauren held his gaze. Then let them question. Maybe the rules need questioning sometimes. David sighed, the fight going out of him. You'll be the one staying up every night. Don't drag anyone else into this. Understood, she replied quietly. But they both knew. No one worked at Blue Ridge who didn't care deeply, even when it hurt. Once the door closed, Lauren bent over Milo again. She stroked his back with one finger, feeling the tremors of life running beneath his thin fur. Come on, little guy, she whispered. The world isn't ready to give up on you yet. While she waited for supplies, Lauren's mind drifted back to childhood evenings, sitting on the stoop while other kids raced bikes and played tag. She'd been the quiet one, the last picked for games, the overlooked shadow. Her mother's voice echoed in memory. Not everyone gets a second chance, Lauren. But if you see someone who needs one, you give it. The interns returned, breathless, arms loaded with formula and supplies. Lauren worked quickly, mixing the powder, testing the temperature on her wrist. She filled the tiny bottle, gently nudged it to Milo's lips. At first, nothing happened. Milo was too weak even to suckle. Come on, please, Cassidy murmured. Lauren massaged Milo's jaw, coaxing, waiting, willing him to respond. Finally, a feeble twitch, a few drops swallowed. It wasn't much, but it was hope. Every few hours, she repeated the process. Heating pads rotated, formula measured, vital signs checked. The rest of the preserve faded away. Phone calls, paperwork, everything except this fragile life in her care. The staff watched with skepticism, but also a glimmer of hope. Cassidy hovered at the door, unable to hide her investment. Jake snuck in between chores, just to check that Milo was still breathing. Word spread quickly. Lauren was breaking protocol, but she was also standing for something deeper. There were whispers, of course. Some staff argued about wasted resources, worried about precedent. Others remembered the animals Lauren had saved over the years, the ones no one else would have bothered with. As day faded into evening, the office lights glowed warm against the growing chill. Lauren scribbled in her journal. First feeding, partial. Breaths shallow but regular. Eyes sealed. Fighting for every moment. If he makes it through the night, it'll be a miracle. Night settled in, heavy and silent. Lauren stayed by Milo's side, exhausted but determined. Every hour she checked his temperature, measured out formula, whispered encouragements. She wondered, was she saving him, or just delaying the inevitable? But with each weak swallow, Milo seemed to be choosing too, choosing to stay, choosing to fight. Out in the wild, Milo's siblings curled close to their mother, their world safe and simple. Here, In a shoebox, under a desk lamp, the smallest bobcat on the mountain was waging his own battle. Lauren couldn't predict the outcome. All she could do was choose, over and over, to give him one more chance. By dawn, Milo's breathing was still thin, but steady. Lauren blinked away sleep, heart pounding. 1 hour at a time, one choice at a time. They had both broken the rules, and for now, that would have to be enough. Would Milo survive? Or had Lauren risked everything? Her job, her reputation, her heart, for nothing? She didn't have the answer, but sometimes the bravest thing in the world is to try, even when nobody else believes. Lauren's office took on the hush of a midnight hospital. Lights dimmed, phones silenced, shadows cast across the floor like watchful sentries. Outside, the forest hummed with the sound of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. But within these four walls, time slowed to the rhythm of a heartbeat. Milo's. The world shrank to a shoebox lined with towels and a battered heating pad. A digital clock ticked off the hours in small, relentless numbers. Milo slept and woke, whimpered and fell silent, his every twitch a test of hope. Lauren had always believed in the magic of new beginnings, yet each night with Milo challenged her resolve. She fought off sleep, eyes stinging as she scribbled notes in a battered journal, recording every feed, every gram gained or lost, every milestone, no matter how small. 1:15 a.m., fed Poisson Mill, weak swallow, temp 96.1, mewled softly after. The first 3 nights were the worst. Exhaustion set up camp behind Lauren's eyes, and doubt gnawed at her. Sometimes, after a failed feeding, she would sit back and let the silence flood in, listening for Milo's breathing, wondering if she was only prolonging the inevitable. She'd buried too many little bodies over the years. Hawks, squirrels, a litter of foxes lost to pneumonia one especially bad winter. Would Milo join them? But each time she began to lose hope, some tiny miracle happened. On the second night, Milo managed a faint, shaky mewl when Lauren brushed a fingertip across his head. The sound was almost nothing, a whisper, but it was enough to send a shiver of relief through her, to stir something fierce and protective in her chest. There were setbacks, too. One night, Milo coughed and spat up half his formula, going limp and frighteningly cold. Lauren's hands shook as she rubbed him with a warm cloth, pleading softly. "Stay with me, little guy. Just keep fighting, okay?" Cassidy, off shift but too worried to sleep, texted every hour for updates. Jake dropped off clean towels and a fresh batch of syringes without being asked. Even David, who'd been so firm about the rules, started leaving thermoses of coffee outside Lauren's door. In these long nights, Lauren began to reflect, not just on Milo, but on herself. Every animal she'd tried to save brought a piece of her past with it. She saw flashes of her mother, stoic and distracted after Lauren's father left. She remembered sitting alone at the kitchen table watching the clock, listening for footsteps that never came. It was no wonder she poured herself into her work, saving the lost, the unwanted, the small and struggling. In saving Milo, was she trying to rescue something of herself? But the work wasn't just emotional. It was relentless, physical, and often heartbreaking. Every 2 hours, Lauren would warm formula, measure it, coax Milo to drink. Sometimes he refused, eyes squeezed shut, trembling with effort. She learned to wait, to talk softly, to celebrate every ounce swallowed. Between feedings, she massaged his limbs, helping stimulate his muscles, and checked his temperature to ward off hypothermia. Yet even as she gave so much, Lauren forced herself to remember. Milo was not a pet. If he survived, he would need to be wild, independent, wary, able to hunt and hide. Her job was to keep him alive, not to tame him. That line was razor thin, and every time she caught herself feeling too attached, she reminded herself, success means letting go. By the end of the first week, there were signs of hope. Milo's fur looked a little thicker, his mews a little stronger. He managed a few awkward steps across the towel, blinking blindly, bumping into the shoebox walls. The sight was both heartwarming and bittersweet. Lauren found herself torn between cheering him on and fearing that each improvement might be followed by a setback. One afternoon, a storm rolled over the preserve, thunder rattling the windows, rain beating a wild tattoo on the roof. Lauren cradled Milo in her hands, watching his tiny chest rise and fall. "We're in this together, you and me," she murmured. "One night at a time." Cassidy came by with an old fleece and a hopeful smile. "He's looking better," she whispered, peeking in the box. "You think he'll make it?" Lauren hesitated. She'd learned to be careful with hope. "I don't know," she admitted. "But every day he survives is another day I didn't expect." That night, Lauren caught herself humming an old lullaby as she fed Milo, a tune from a childhood she thought she'd forgotten. The clock ticked past midnight, into morning, as the storm passed and the quiet returned. In those hours, something shifted, not just in Milo, but in Lauren too. She realized that hope didn't come all at once. It was a choice she had to make over and over, with every feeding, every sigh, every heartbeat that said, "I'm still here." As dawn broke over the Blue Ridge, fog hugging the mountain and sunlight creeping into the office, Milo managed his first real lick of formula on his own, a moment so small it could have been missed. Lauren saw it, and her hands trembled with joy. Have you ever given everything to something so small, just praying for a sign it'll be enough? That's what these nights were, a test of patience, a leap of faith. Each tiny victory mattered, and every setback hurt. But Milo, the bobcat nobody chose, was still fighting, and as long as he fought, so would Lauren. Rain hammered the tin roof of Lauren's office, each drop sharp and cold like the world outside. Nights in the Blue Ridge Wildlife Preserve were wild and indifferent, a reminder that nature didn't care about second chances. But within these four walls, under the thin glow of a desk lamp, Lauren was determined to rewrite the rules, if only for one tiny life. Milo had survived a week, a miracle by any measure. The runt everyone expected to fade away was clinging stubbornly to existence. Every night brought new anxieties. Would he wake up shivering, listless, unable to eat? Or would he surprise them all again with some new sign of strength? Lauren's exhaustion was bone deep, but her resolve only hardened. Sleep came in broken fragments, snatched between feedings and record-keeping. Yet it was during those long, sleepless nights that her mind drifted back to her own beginnings. She remembered her father's heavy silence at the dinner table, the way her mother's grief had turned her distant and distracted. Lauren was always the quiet one, the one teachers forgot, the kid who lingered at the back of the classroom and tried not to be noticed. She understood, in a way words couldn't capture, what it felt like to be overlooked. Maybe that's why Milo's fight felt so personal. By now, Milo had begun to open his eyes, a slow, blinking process that seemed to take days. The first time Lauren saw those cloudy blue slits peering up at her, her breath caught. He looked lost and bewildered, his world suddenly vast and bright. His legs were shaky, his body fragile, but for the first time, he tried to stand. It was a clumsy, unsteady effort, his paws splayed wide for balance, back legs slipping on the towel. Lauren watched, heart in her throat, resisting the urge to help. Milo had to learn to fight for himself. He toppled sideways, let out a frustrated mewl, then tried again. This time he managed a few steps, more crawl than walk, before collapsing in a panting heap. Lauren let herself smile, blinking back tears. Every inch, every breath was a victory. But her joy was tinged with worry. Saving Milo's life was only the beginning. Could she prepare him for a world that had already rejected him? She needed to help him learn the ways of the wild, skills a bobcat needed to survive, instincts she could never fully teach. The challenge wasn't just physical, it was philosophical. Was she raising a survivor or a captive? Was love enough to make up for what nature denied? Determined, Lauren began to introduce Milo to the building blocks of wildness. She placed tufts of real fur in his box, scented with pine and earth, gathered from the preserve. She brought in leaves, twigs, even a few beetles and crickets, still alive much to Cassidy's squeamish dismay. At first, Milo was confused. He sniffed and prodded with his nose, batting at the insects with uncertain paws. Instinct kicked in, and soon he was stalking crickets across the towel, pouncing with wobbly enthusiasm. One afternoon, Lauren decided it was time for Milo to feel grass beneath his feet. She set up a small enclosure just outside her office, a safe patch of lawn enclosed by netting, away from prying eyes and predators. Milo squinted at the sunlight, wary but curious. The smells, the wind, the distant calls of birds, all of it was new, overwhelming, and deeply exciting. Lauren sat nearby, notebook in hand, watching. She made notes on everything: how Milo reacted to sounds, how he navigated the uneven ground, how he chased shadows with fierce concentration. She cheered when he caught his first cricket, a triumphant moment that left him licking his lips and blinking in surprise. But not every lesson was easy. One morning, Milo froze at the sound of a distant hawk. He pressed himself flat against the grass, heart racing, eyes wide. Lauren's chest tightened. Fear was part of survival, too. The wild wasn't just beautiful, it was dangerous, unforgiving. At night, Milo slept curled up against a stuffed animal Lauren had fashioned out of old fleece, shaped roughly like another bobcat. She knew she was walking a fine line. Too much comfort, and Milo might never adapt. Too little, and he could wither from loneliness. Balance was everything. As the days passed, Lauren's attachment deepened. She found herself lingering in the office long after her shift, reading wildlife manuals and watching videos about rewilding young predators. She reached out to colleagues across the country, seeking advice, comparing notes, gathering every ounce of knowledge she could. One rainy evening, after Milo had eaten a particularly good meal and was now exploring the edges of his enclosure, Lauren let herself wonder, was she fooling herself, trying to rewrite the rules? Could love really bridge the gap between nature and nurture? She thought about the preserve, about all the lives she'd seen come and go. Sometimes the best you could do was give a little hope, a little warmth, and trust that it would be enough. Is love enough to make up for what nature denies? She wondered. Or are we just fooling ourselves, trying to rewrite the rules? That night, as rain drummed on the roof and wind rattled the windows, Milo curled up in his box and purred, soft and tentative, but real. Lauren watched him and felt a flicker of something new. Maybe the answer wasn't simple. Maybe the fight was the point. Outside, the wild remained indifferent. But in this small office, against all odds, a tiny bobcat was learning how to stand, how to fight, and, maybe, just maybe, how to find his place in the world. By the time May crept across the mountains, Milo's progress was impossible to ignore. He was no longer just a fragile scrap of fur. He'd grown into a curious, willful kitten with bright eyes and an appetite that could challenge the supply closet. Every morning, Lauren marveled at his energy as he scrambled after insects in his grassy enclosure or pounced on pine cones with fierce intent. The staff couldn't help but smile when Milo pressed his nose against the wire, demanding attention or food, or when he'd leap and tumble, legs all gangly and wild. But as Milo grew stronger, the world around him grew more uncertain. It began with the foxes. David was the first to notice the red-furred vixens out by the pond, moving slower than usual, their coats patchy and dull. Within days, the keepers confirmed the worst: mange. It was spreading rapidly, not just among the foxes, but threatening every mammal in the preserve, including the bobcats. Mange wasn't just unsightly, it was cruel. Itched raw, weakened by infection, animals often died if they couldn't be treated quickly. The news spread through Blue Ridge like wildfire, fraying nerves and routines. Staff rushed to isolate infected animals, disinfecting enclosures and gear. But for Lauren, the outbreak triggered a fresh surge of dread. Milo was still too young, too vulnerable. His immune system, already tested by his rough start, wouldn't survive if he caught it. She made the call that very day. Milo had to be isolated entirely. No more visits from the interns. No more outside enclosure. Not even the other rescued bobcat kittens, who sometimes shared mealtime through the fence. Lauren set up a quarantine area at the far end of her office, double-checking every barrier and sterilizing every surface. The once lively days shrank into hushed hours, Milo peering through plexiglass with wide, confused eyes. Cassidy pressed her nose to the glass. "He looks lonely," she whispered. Lauren's voice was soft, but firm. "It's for his own good. The outbreak's bad, Cass. If he gets sick, he won't have a chance." Even Jake, normally upbeat, looked troubled. "He's gonna miss the others." They were starting to bond. "I know," Lauren said, heart aching. "But this is about survival, not comfort." It didn't take long for the whispering to start. The other staff, already anxious about the outbreak, began to question Lauren's choices. "She's getting too close to that bobcat," one of the older keepers muttered in the break room. "It's not healthy, for her or for him." Another added, "He'll never make it in the wild if he depends on her this much." Lauren heard the talk, saw the sidelong glances as she carried Milo's food tray, felt the judgment heavy as the mountain fog. But she didn't waver. Every night, she stayed late, checking Milo for symptoms: scratching, hair loss, lethargy. She wrote meticulous notes, double-checked everything, and forced herself to keep some distance. She didn't cuddle Milo. She kept her voice firm, movements brisk, treating him like the wild animal he was meant to become. But Milo didn't understand protocol or caution. He pawed at the glass, his mewling plaintive, especially at night when the preserve went quiet. Lauren would catch herself standing outside his enclosure, hands pressed to the plastic, whispering encouragement. "You're tough. You've made it this far. Hang in there, little guy." The days blurred together, marked by worry and routine, and as the mange outbreak worsened, Lauren realized the usual recovery plan wouldn't work for Milo. He was still too fragile for group reintegration, but if he stayed isolated much longer, he'd never learn the social cues or survival skills he'd need for life outside. The solution, she realized, had to be creative. She petitioned the preserve's director for extra resources: funds for a custom outdoor enclosure, safely distanced from other animals but rich with scents and sounds of the wild. He needs to learn how to be a bobcat, she argued. Not just survive, thrive. It wasn't an easy sell, not with the preserve's budget stretched thin by the outbreak. But Lauren wouldn't let up. She pored over schematics, sourced donations from local hardware stores, even called in favors from retired staff. Finally, after days of stubborn persistence, she got approval. Over a rainy weekend, Lauren, Cassidy, and Jake worked until their arms ached, setting posts, stringing wire, laying sod and logs, creating a miniature wilderness just for Milo. When they finished, the enclosure was small but rich. Brush for hiding, rocks for climbing, soil for digging, a shallow pool for drinking. The first time Milo stepped outside, he froze, nose quivering, ears flicking, body low to the ground. The world was bigger, wilder, scarier than the safe cocoon he'd grown used to. But soon, curiosity triumphed over caution. He crept forward, sniffing the air, testing each patch of grass, exploring every shadow. He stalked bugs, leapt after falling leaves, even startled a frog into the pool. Lauren watched from a distance, chest swelling with pride and fear. But as Milo thrived in his new space, the staff's doubts deepened. Some still whispered that Lauren was making it too easy for him, that he'd never survive in the real wild. Others, watching the little bobcat hunting crickets and scaling logs, started to wonder if maybe she was right, if compassion and wildness could be balanced after all. At night, when the preserve was quiet and the mountain wind rattled the windows, Lauren sat by Milo's enclosure, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, thinking about everything at stake. When the world seems stacked against you, she wrote in her journal, do you double down or start to let go? She didn't know the answer, but as she watched Milo, alert, restless, growing bolder with each passing day, she hoped she was giving him what he needed most, not just a chance at life, but a chance at freedom. And sometimes, in the hush between the wild and the waiting, Lauren caught a glimpse of her own reflection in the glass, a reminder that the fight to belong, to survive, was as much hers as it was Milo's. Summer arrived on a wave of southern heat, painting the Blue Ridge Hills a lush green and driving the morning mist from the trees. The preserve buzzed with new life, songbirds nesting, deer grazing in the meadows, and the distant call of coyotes at dusk. But inside her small office, Lauren's world had narrowed to a single critical question. Was Milo truly ready for the wild? The mange outbreak was finally under control. Milo had passed every health check, his fur grown thick and glossy, muscles rippling under his small frame as he darted through his private enclosure. He'd learned to pounce on crickets, skulk through brush and snarl, softly, almost comically, at shadows. But as Lauren watched him leap and tumble in the waning afternoon light, the weight of her responsibility settled heavy in her chest. There was a world out there that wouldn't care how far he'd come, or how hard he'd fought to survive. It was time for the next big test, a night alone outdoors. Lauren prepped for days. She equipped Milo's outdoor enclosure with hidden cameras, checked every inch of wire and netting, scattered food and scents to mimic what he might find in the wild. It wasn't perfect, but it was as close as she could offer, a safe crucible for the challenge ahead. Milo would face the dark, the rain, the wind, and the unfamiliar without her by his side. The idea unsettled her in ways she couldn't quite name. As the sky darkened on the chosen evening, thunderheads gathered on the horizon, and a sticky humidity filled the air. David caught Lauren watching the weather and arched an eyebrow. "You sure you want to do this tonight? Storm's coming in." She nodded, her voice steady but thin. He needs to know what it's really like. The wild doesn't wait for perfect conditions. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Lauren placed Milo in the enclosure. The air was tense with electricity, both literal and emotional. Milo paced the perimeter, sniffed at the corners, then shot Lauren a look, half question, half challenge. "Be brave, little guy," Lauren whispered. She set down a handful of raw quail, locked the gate, and stepped back, resisting every urge to intervene. The first hour, Milo hunkered in a pile of leaves, eyes wide, flinching at every rumble of thunder. The cameras streamed his every movement to Lauren's laptop in her office, and she watched, nerves raw, as rain began to patter down and wind rattled the branches overhead. As the storm intensified, Milo's world shrank to a patch of brush under a log. Lightning flashed, and thunder rolled. Lauren paced her office, glued to the grainy video feed. The wind sent sheets of rain across the enclosure, and Milo trembled, pressing himself flat to the ground. For a moment, Lauren's heart ached with guilt. Was this too much? Too soon? Was she risking everything for the sake of a lesson? But as the night deepened, Milo's instincts began to surface. He sniffed at puddles, tested the air, and, when a mouse darted from the shadows, lunged in pursuit. The first attempt was clumsy. Milo slipped, paws skidding on wet grass. The mouse vanished, and Milo froze, blinking in the rain. Then, as if something wild and ancient awoke in him, he crouched low, tail flicking, and tried again. This time, he cornered his prey, and with a burst of speed, caught it. He held it awkwardly, not quite sure what to do, but the success was unmistakable. Lauren let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "That's it, Milo. That's what you're meant for." The hours crawled by. Milo braved the storm, retreated, ventured out, learned from every mistake. He sheltered under logs, stalked bugs, and hissed at gusts of wind. Every time Lauren's hands hovered over the phone, tempted to dash outside and bring him in, she stopped herself. The wild was teaching him what no human could. But just as Lauren thought the worst was over, something unexpected appeared on the edge of the camera feed. A shape, large, low, moving with a predator's confidence. An adult male bobcat, a resident of the preserve, drawn by the scent of another feline in his territory. Lauren's blood went cold. The enclosure was secure, but the older bobcat prowled around its perimeter, sniffing, snarling softly. Milo shrank against the fence, fur bristling, eyes huge. The two bobcats eyed each other for long minutes, tension thick as the storm outside. Lauren's thoughts raced. Was Milo ready for this? Had she done enough? Was her care making him a survivor, or just marking him as forever different, forever an outsider? After a tense standoff, the older bobcat faded into the night, curiosity unsatisfied, but no harm done. Milo, breathing hard, watched the darkness long after the intruder was gone. Then, with trembling resolve, he circled his enclosure, sniffing every inch, laying his own tiny claim on the world. Dawn broke wet and gray. Lauren hurried to the enclosure the moment the storm eased, heart pounding. She found Milo wet, muddy, exhausted, but alive. And something had changed in his eyes. There was pride there, a spark of wildness that no amount of human care could ever manufacture. She knelt by the wire, voice thick with emotion. "You did it, Milo. You faced the wild, and you're still here." Back in her office, Lauren wrote in her journal, "Are we protecting him? or holding him back? The question echoed through the quiet morning. But as Milo stalked through the grass, tail high, Lauren knew the answer was changing. One storm, one night, one lesson at a time. Summer pressed heavily against the Blue Ridge, drenching the preserve in humidity and thick green shadow. Milo's world had grown wilder, and so had he. With every passing day, his movements became surer, his eyes keener, and his confidence unmistakable. The staff watched him from a distance. Now, even the doubters were caught up in his story. Lauren kept her professional detachment in public, but when she was alone with Milo, her pride could hardly be contained. But wildness brings risk. No enclosure, no matter how cleverly built, could prepare a bobcat for every challenge. Milo's real test would come when his boundaries vanished, when only instinct, luck, and courage could save him. Lauren knew that, and she prepared, as always, for the worst. The night it happened, the air was restless, one of those nights when animals sense something on the move. Lauren had grown used to checking on Milo through the camera feed, her phone never far from reach. On this particular night, the wind rattled the eaves and the moon rode high and full over the trees. Milo was restless too, pacing the far edge of the pen, tail twitching, ears pricked for any sound. She was making her rounds, clipboard in hand, lost in thought about a sick owl in the recovery ward, when the alarm on her phone buzzed. The camera feed showed only blackness for a moment, then the wobbly image of the gate swinging open, unlatched by a gust of wind, or maybe just the daily wear and tear that comes from determined claws and weather. Milo stood framed in the doorway, a creature of pure, raw curiosity. Then, as if the wild itself had beckoned, he slipped through the gap and was gone. For a moment, Lauren froze, her mind racing. "No, no, no," she whispered, dropping her clipboard. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but training and adrenaline took over. She radioed David and the rest of the team, her voice clipped but urgent. "Milo's out. Check all points. Move, now." Within minutes, flashlights bobbed through the underbrush as staff fanned out across the preserve. Lauren's boots hit the trail, heart pounding, every shadow and rustle sending her imagination into overdrive. She called softly, not expecting an answer. She didn't want to scare Milo, just let him know she was near. They searched for hours, the woods echoing with calls and whispers. Cassidy found the first sign, tiny paw prints in the soft mud by the stream, so fresh they still held the shape of Milo's claws. Jake found a tuft of fur snagged on a low branch, and then, unmistakable in the dirt beneath the pines, David spotted what made Lauren's blood run cold, the much larger paw prints of the adult male bobcat. "Milo's not alone," he said grimly. For a long time they found nothing else. The preserve was a vast, tangled world at night, alive with scents and dangers. The team regrouped at dawn, exhausted and silent, as birds began to call across the valley. Lauren felt hollowed out, braced for the worst. She pictured Milo, so small, so new to the world, encountering the resident male. Territorial fights among wild bobcats were often brutal, sometimes fatal. Had she pushed him too hard, too soon? Cassidy, eyes red-rimmed, put a hand on Lauren's shoulder. "He's a fighter. If anyone can make it, it's him." Still, doubt gnawed at Lauren. She'd broken so many rules for Milo, taken so many chances. Was this where it all ended? Was her faith in second chances just another kind of blindness? Then, just as the morning light crested the ridge, Jake called out, voice cracking with excitement. "Over here! I see something!" The team hurried to the far side of the preserve, where the trees gave way to open grassland. There, At the edge of a stand of mountain laurel was Milo, muddy, scratched, fur bristling, but alive. And he wasn't alone. The older male bobcat stood nearby, watchful but not hostile, tail flicking in lazy, measured arcs. For a moment, no one dared move. Milo sat upright, battered but proud, golden eyes clear and alert. The older bobcat sniffed the air, eyed Milo, and with a silent nod that only wild things understand, accepted his presence. He didn't attack, didn't drive the younger cat away. Instead, he turned and padded off into the woods. Milo a step behind, an apprentice following a master. Lauren let out a sob, half relief, half disbelief. "He did it," she murmured. "He really did it." David grinned, clapping her on the back. "Looks like he passed his test." Lauren's pride was immense, but her heart ached too. Letting go wasn't just hard, it was terrifying. But in this moment, she saw Milo as he truly was, not a pet, not a captive, but a wild thing, born for this mountain, worthy of its challenges. Later, as the team returned to their routines, Lauren lingered in the quiet morning, watching the place where Milo had disappeared. She understood, in a way she never had before, that real love meant trust. Trusting the ones we care for to find their own path, even when it meant risking heartbreak. She wrote in her journal, "Sometimes, letting go is the only way to truly hold on." That evening, as the sun set and the preserve grew quiet, Lauren walked the trails alone, listening for the call of a bobcat somewhere out in the wild. And though she might never see Milo again, she knew he was where he belonged, facing the mountain, brave and free. The days after Milo's release passed in a kind of dreamlike blur. The preserve's routines rolled on, feeding, medicating, cleaning, the ceaseless dance of wildness and care. But for Lauren, everything felt different. Milo's absence haunted her office, a silent reminder that her work with him was, for the first time, truly out of her hands. She found herself drifting to the window, eyes searching the edge of the woods, listening for a familiar rustle or an echo of his soft mewl. But the forest kept its secrets, the thick summer growth swallowing up sound and movement alike. The only evidence of Milo was what he'd left behind. A few stray tufts of fur, faint paw prints in the muddy edge of the outdoor pen. The battered journal on Lauren's desk filled with frantic midnight notes and hard-won triumphs. Lauren poured herself into work, but her mind always circled back to Milo. She wondered about the life he was building in the wild, whether he'd managed to find shelter, whether he was hungry or scared or thriving. She wondered about the old male bobcat. Had he become a mentor, or would instinct eventually make him a rival? The questions gnawed at her, but she forced herself to let them be. This was the lesson she'd always preached, but rarely practiced. Success in wildlife rescue is measured by absence, not presence. The animals you don't see, the ones who never need to come back, are the ones who made it. Even so, letting go wasn't easy. One evening, Lauren lingered at the edge of Milo's enclosure, now empty except for a few scattered toys and the faded smell of wildcat. Cassidy joined her, silent for a while before finally asking, "Do you think he misses us?" Lauren managed a small, wistful smile. "Maybe for a day, maybe not at all. That's how it should be, right? If we did it right, he doesn't need us now." Cassidy hesitated. "Does it get any easier?" Lauren shook her head, the truth settling between them like a heavy fog. "No, it just gets different. I'm happy for him. I just wish it didn't feel so much like losing something." They stood together as dusk deepened, fireflies blinking above the grass, A barred owl called somewhere up the ridge, and for a moment, Lauren let herself imagine Milo out there, a shadow slipping through the underbrush, confident and free. Back in her office, Lauren took to reviewing her notes on Milo, preparing the final report for the preserves board. She wrote about his milestones, his first feeding, his first steps, his awkward attempts at pouncing, the stormy night when he proved he could survive alone. She described the risks she'd taken, the rules she'd bent, and the lessons she'd learned along the way. More than anything, she emphasized the delicate balance between intervention and restraint, between helping and letting go. In a meeting with the other staff, Lauren spoke candidly about the experience. Wildlife rescue is never about keeping them safe forever. It's about giving them a second chance and then trusting them to take it. The real measure of our work isn't in the animals we hold on to. It's in the ones we let go, the ones we may never see again. Some staff nodded, while others still wore doubt on their faces. The tension of the mange outbreak, the pressure of resources stretched thin, had taken a toll on everyone. But Lauren saw a shift, however small, in the room. Cassidy and Jake spoke up, sharing how much they'd learned from Milo, not just about animal care, but about resilience, patience, and hope. That night, as Lauren walked home beneath a sky heavy with stars, she turned the lesson over in her mind. All her life, she'd fought to prove her worth. To her parents, her teachers, her colleagues, and most of all, herself. Milo's journey had forced her to reckon with her own need for control, her fear of failure, and her relentless drive to save every creature, even when it wasn't possible. She realized that what Milo needed most wasn't protection from every danger, but freedom, to stumble, to learn, to grow, and ultimately, to belong to a world that would never notice him the way she had. The love that mattered wasn't the kind that clung, but the kind that trusted enough to let go. The following week, Lauren met with the preserves director and shared her conclusions. "We need to rethink how we measure success," she said. "It's not about numbers or stories we can share on social media. It's about knowing when to step back, even when it hurts. And it's about giving second chances, not just to the animals, but to the people who care for them, too." The director nodded thoughtfully, agreeing to consider new protocols for future rescues, with greater emphasis on individualized care and gradual rewilding. As the summer rolled on, Lauren found a new rhythm. She mentored Cassidy and Jake more closely, helping them navigate the heartbreak and hope that came with every rescue case. She even took time for herself, long hikes in the woods, sketching birds at dawn, letting the mountain air clear the lingering ache of loss. One morning, a fellow keeper stopped by her office, a trail camera in hand. "You might want to see this," he said, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. Lauren took the camera, her hands shaking a little as she flipped through the images, and there, clear as day, was Milo, stalking through the underbrush, eyes bright and body strong, alone and unmistakably wild. She laughed, a sound full of joy and relief. "He made it," she whispered. "He really made it." Standing at the window, Lauren watched the woods beyond the preserve, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. She understood now. Real love is brave enough to let go, wise enough to trust, and patient enough to hope, without needing to see the outcome. In the end, Milo was where he belonged, and so was she. Months slipped by as the Blue Ridge forest cycled through the heat of late summer into the painted leaves and crisp winds of fall. Life on the preserve never paused. There were always new rescues, emergencies, and dramas. A raccoon hit by a car, a trio of orphaned opossums, a bear cub with a snare around its paw. Yet for Lauren, each day was colored by thoughts of a certain bobcat now lost to the wild. She didn't speak of him often, but Milo's absence was its own presence. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between morning feedings and evening checks, she would find herself staring out the window, tracing the distant ridge with her gaze. Had Milo found shelter from the worst of the rains? Did he remember the soft encouragement of her voice, or had the wild fully claimed him at last? In truth, Lauren knew these questions didn't matter. If Milo was thriving, she would never see him again, and that, she reminded herself daily, was the point. True success wasn't in her hands. It lived somewhere in the hush of the mountain and the movement of shadows beneath the trees. It was late September when proof arrived. Jake burst into her office, breathless and grinning, holding a trail camera in both hands. "Lauren, you've got to see this. Just pulled it off Post 3, the East Ridge. I think it's him." They huddled around the small, flickering screen, cycling through a week's worth of images. Deer, a black bear, a mother fox with her kits. Then, there he was, a healthy bobcat, muscular and sleek, moving with the cautious confidence only a wild animal could possess. He stalked a squirrel, leapt up onto a log, paused to drink at a stream. There was no mistaking the faint notch in his left ear or the unique dappling on his flank. Milo. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The sense of accomplishment, of awe, was overwhelming. Cassidy pressed a hand to her heart, whispering, "He looks amazing." Lauren found herself blinking back tears, not of grief, but of the rarest kind of pride. He's not just surviving, he's living. And then, a few frames later, the camera caught another surprise. Milo, side by side with a slightly smaller bobcat, sleek, eyes bright, coat shining in the autumn sun. They moved together in easy companionship, pausing to nuzzle each other before slipping back into the forest's embrace. The news spread quickly through the preserve. Staff who had once doubted the wisdom of Lauren's choices gathered around the monitors, passing the camera from hand to hand, voices full of wonder. Even David, ever the skeptic, grinned and shook his head. "Well, I'll be damned. You gave that cat a real shot." Milo's story rippled outward, touching more than just the staff. The board of the preserve invited Lauren to present his case at the next meeting, using Milo as an example of both the challenges and possibilities of compassionate wildlife rescue. Lauren was honest in her report about the late nights, the doubts, the near misses, and the pain of letting go. She didn't sugarcoat the risks, but she spoke passionately about the power of second chances and the importance of balancing science with heart. Milo's legacy became a catalyst for change. The preserve's protocols shifted, blending stricter health precautions with more flexibility for individual cases. Staff were encouraged to consider the unique needs and potential of each animal, rather than relying on blanket rules. The preserve began offering workshops on rewilding, with Lauren leading sessions on what it really meant to let go. Word traveled beyond Blue Ridge. Articles appeared in local newspapers. "Against the odds, the bobcat nobody chose." School groups came to tour the preserve and hear Milo's story. Volunteers asked questions about second chances and about how compassion could coexist with the sometimes brutal demands of wildlife care. Lauren saw her own journey reflected in the changing attitudes of the staff and community. Where once she'd felt alone in her willingness to take risks, she now found herself surrounded by colleagues who valued courage, and empathy. Cassidy, inspired by Milo, decided to go back to school for wildlife biology. Jake developed a mentorship program for local teens, using Milo's story to teach about resilience and hope. Yet for Lauren, the deepest lesson was quieter and more personal. She realized that Milo's journey wasn't just about one small bobcat beating the odds. It was about what happens when someone chooses to notice, when someone says, "Not this time," and means it. She thought about all the Milos she'd known over the years, the fragile, the overlooked, the almost forgotten, and wondered how many had slipped through the cracks for lack of a believer. Her journal filled with reflections. It's not about taming the wild, but about giving every life, even the most unlikely, a fighting chance. How many Milos are out there, waiting for someone to notice them? Maybe more than we think. One chilly evening, Lauren walked to the ridge where the trail camera had been set. She sat quietly on a fallen log, breathing in the scent of leaves and damp earth, listening for the sounds of twilight. Somewhere beyond the trees, Milo lived, free, fierce, and finally, utterly himself. In that moment, Lauren understood. His story was no longer hers to tell. It belonged to the mountain, to the wild, and to every person willing to believe that the smallest, most overlooked among us could one day change the world. For Lauren, the story of Milo didn't end on a mountaintop or in a trail camera's flash. It followed her everywhere, a gentle ache and a profound hope, shaping the way she viewed her work, her community, and herself. Milo had become something bigger than one rescue, one bobcat, one hard-won victory. He was a living reminder that the smallest, weakest, and most overlooked among us can still surprise the world, and maybe even change it. As the seasons shifted once more, autumn surrendering to winter, frost glittering on the pines, Lauren found herself speaking about Milo more often, not just to the board or to new volunteers at Blue Ridge, but to anyone who needed to hear the story. Children on field trips, exhausted colleagues, strangers who wrote to ask how a lost animal could find its way home. Each time she told it slightly differently, but the heart of the story never changed. She'd say, "This isn't just about a bobcat. It's about anyone who's ever been counted out, left behind, or told they weren't strong enough. It's about second chances and stubborn hope. If you've ever felt like Milo, even once, I hope you'll remember this. You matter more than you know." After her talks, people came up with stories of their own. A teacher spoke about the shy student in the back row who surprised everyone with a science fair win. A grandfather remembered his mother's faith in him, even when the odds seemed impossible. A young volunteer confessed she'd always felt invisible, until she started helping at the preserve, until she saw what one person's belief could do. Lauren started to see Milos everywhere, in the rescued animals, of course, but also in the hesitant intern trying to bandage a bird for the first time, in the teenager who volunteered every Saturday, never missing a shift, in the new staff member who asked shyly for advice, then returned weeks later with innovative ideas that transformed the nursery. The world, she realized, was full of the overlooked, the underestimated, the quietly brave. She wrote about this in the Preserve's newsletter, reaching out to the wider community. If you have a Milo near you, animal or human, give them a little extra patience tonight. You never know what second chances can become. The mountain is big, but so is hope. Sometimes it just takes one believer. And for herself, Lauren carried the story like a secret promise. She remembered her own lonely childhood, the years spent trying not to be noticed, and all the tiny kindnesses that had made survival possible. She saw now that every second chance she'd given, whether it ended in heartbreak or success, was also a second chance for herself. Milo's legacy was as much about her as it was about him. Blue Ridge Wildlife Preserve felt the impact, too. The story changed how new staff were trained. They learned to notice the ones who struggled, to look twice at the smallest, to question the old protocols when compassion was needed. The preserve started a program for kids who'd been bullied or left behind at school, letting them work with animals like Milo, giving both the animals and the kids a chance to prove their worth. Word about Milo spread further still, featured in local news, picked up by national wildlife organizations, inspiring people Lauren would never meet. Messages arrived from faraway places, parents whose children wanted to help animals, people facing hard times, who said Milo's story gave them hope. Rescue workers using the story as motivation to keep going when their days felt endless and thankless. For Lauren, these responses were both humbling and empowering. She understood, finally, what it meant for a story to outgrow its teller. She hoped Milo was somewhere on the mountain, wild and free, never knowing he'd become a symbol for so many. Maybe that was the greatest gift, his story giving courage to people who'd never meet him, who might never see a bobcat in the wild, but who would still carry the lesson forward. Sometimes, Lauren walked the preserve alone at dusk, letting the cool air settle around her, thinking of all the animals she'd tried to save, and all the ones who had saved her in their own way. She saw now that every little fight for survival, every stubborn hope, every moment of patience and trust was worth it. Not just because it changed a life, but because it changed a heart. She ended her talks and newsletters with the same gentle encouragement. If you've ever felt like Milo, left behind, counted out, but still fighting, I hope you'll share your story or pass this one along. Maybe someone else needs to know they're not alone. Maybe you'll be the one who notices a Milo in your own life, and you'll give them a chance the world almost forgot. Lauren knew she'd never stop searching for the small ones, the ones who didn't stand out at first glance. She'd keep listening for their stories in the wild cry of an owl, the flash of fur in the undergrowth, the shy smile of a new volunteer. And every time she found one, she'd remember Milo, the bobcat nobody chose, who turned out to be the bravest of them all. The mountain was vast, the wild was indifferent, but hope could bloom anywhere, sometimes in the smallest, most unlikely places. And as long as there were Milos out there, Lauren would be there too, ready to believe.